Hi, welcome. Good to have you hopefully back to my vlog or my Substack or my Spotify account or wherever you're meeting me in this series of conversations I'm recording with media professionals as well as academics who are active in the field of mental health, well-being, and happiness of practitioners in the various media industries. And today I'm talking with Marcus Ryder and Rupert Lee Jones and of the British Film and Television Charity, an organization that has been around for quite a while and since 2019 has consistently commissioned incredibly useful, detailed, as well as statistically representative research documenting the depth and the width of the health crisis among screen workers, showing time and time again how systemic issues drive people to struggle or even suffer at work while also loving what they do. Documenting how the industry's working conditions, the industry culture, its competitive and transactional nature, and its limited capacity or capability to address any of these issues cause people to struggle, to suffer, to have poor mental and then related physical, emotional health. Marcus Ryder is an MBE, has more than 25 years of experience of working in the media, including, for example, as a senior executive at the BBC. He's won awards, BAFTA, the Royal Television Society, the Foreign Press Association. Marcus is also the chair of the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. He also has been the head of external consultancies at the Sir Lenny Henry Center for Media Diversity, and has also won, for example, a prestigious award in the US by the National Association of Black Journalists in 2023. So my second guest is Rupert Lee Jones, and Rupert is the head of research and impact at the Film and Television Charity. He's a visiting fellow at Bournemouth University, and before joining the charity, Rupert spent 10 years at Northern Film and Media, working in talent development and public affairs, having had a long and distinguished career in social policy, and we share a history in the northeast of England, where Rupert works with colleagues at Newcastle University, and having been involved with all kinds of community projects as well through the Labour Party. And with Rupert and Marcus, we did talk about the 4 so-called looking glass surveys among thousands and thousands of screen workers in film and television and what these surveys tell us. We talk about how these surveys and the data, these and other projects that the charity has commissioned help to reframe issues such as discrimination or bullying and harassment and those kind of things as health issues, thereby broadening the conversation and providing clear ways of engaging with these structural issues, systemic issues that are plaguing work across the media. We're talking about the pitfalls of what Rupert calls synthetic proximity. The notion that in media work, you tend to work with others, often intensely so. Media professionals sometimes describe themselves and their colleagues as a family, for example, working on a film or TV production, but at the same time feeling inauthentic, lonely, isolated, unable to really talk about what you really feel or what's happening. And even if you do raise an issue, sometimes getting bullied for doing so or stigmatized. We're talking about how the surveys of the charity, on the one hand, document consistently the same systemic issues which seems kind of depressing, but also signaling hopeful accounts of increasing engagement across the industry with these issues. The benefit of focused efforts of really tackling issues, for example, for targeted groups of people, either on the local or production or community level, or through specific activities targeting, for example, people with Jewish or Arab backgrounds working in the industry. So a real substantive discussion. I hope you'll enjoy it with two people at the forefront of not just tackling health and well-being issues across the industries, but doing so from a profoundly representative statistical base of evidence, which is a truly remarkable effort that informs and inspires the work of so many organizations around the world. Yeah, so thanks again for making the time. It's such an honor to do this with you. I mean, there's a lot of professional organizations active in this space, but I do feel, and that's what I hear from other organizations and colleagues that I talk to in the industry, that the Looking Glass surveys are kind of a benchmark also for a lot of other people in other countries, that they're using the data or they're using your setup. I know we talked in the past about other countries wanting to sort of copy and paste the survey for their respective industry workforces. And so I wonder if maybe you can tell me a little bit about the history of these surveys, right? I mean, what prompted the first installment? I think that was in 2019, if I'm not, yeah, just before the pandemic. And then I guess what I'm also asking is, when the results came in, that must have been a shock, or was it sort of, well, it confirmed what you already knew? Could both of you speak a little bit about that?
I think Rupert might be better placed to answer this one because I only joined in 2023. Um, so my position is either secondhand from other people in the organization, or no more informed than any other person working in film and television in the UK, seeing the results come in.
Um, okay, so the immediate background was that the film television charity had set up a support line shortly before. This is a free 24/7 confidential telephone and web chat service. And we were getting quite a lot of evidence through that there was abnormally poor mental health amongst people working in film, television, and cinema. We work in an evidence-based way, and when we looked for an evidence base to test what we were finding against, there really was very little. There was a short Australian paper looking at mental health in film and television, and there was a longer Irish paper looking at the creative industries as a whole, but not with any particularly refined focus on film and TV. So we realized we had to do the research ourselves. And that's basically the genesis of the Looking Glass. The first survey was done in 2019. The report was actually published in 2020, but it's referred to as 2019. We were surprised by the extent of what it exposed. It broadly confirmed what we'd expected, but the extent was really striking, particularly when compared with other industrial sectors. And in terms of what we did with it afterwards, I mean, that may be one to hand over to Marcus. But I think, as you're aware, we developed the whole picture program out of that, and that involved a suite of different products, including a toolkit that has now become a program in its own right. And perhaps, Marcus, that's a point to hand over to you.
Right. So someone who was not working at the charity, I think the genius, and I think it was genius, with regards to doing the survey, was a reframing of the debate. I think that's what the survey, and I think that's what the Film and TV charity did, because what we were talking about in 2019 was issues of Harvey Weinstein, of bullying and harassment, and even though people think of 2020 as a landmark year, obviously because of Black Lives Matter, in many ways 2020 was a high mark for talking about racism, because there was a lot leading up to talking about racism in the industry before that. It didn't just come out of the blue. And so the genius for me, or the breakthrough for me, was the film and TV charity to recognize that there was something systemic happening and framing it in terms of mental health. So that's where I think, we now take it for granted that we are having a discussion around mental health, but it was not a foregone conclusion as somebody who was external to the film and TV charity, that this was a way of actually framing a lot of things that were going on in the film and TV industry. So I think that's really important, and to see it through that lens.
It's such a powerful observation. I mean, in my country, over the last years, there have been a lot of reports on, transgressive behavior at the workplace and bullying and harassment. Of course, extremely important, very key issues. But it almost seems that people are sort of satisfied to just talk about those, I guess, what we could call extreme cases that we would consider now, thanks largely to the Looking Glass service and similar project, as symptoms of a more systemic problem. And as you say, and I do remember reading in those first reports of the charity this, and I just so love that also as an academic, this sort of this shortcut to the 3C problem, right? The working conditions, industry cultures, and the limited capability of the industry to really address this in any meaningful way. I mean, and it seems that if I look at the most recent reports, I mean, the 2024 survey, that's still a really useful framework to signal the systemic nature of these issues. Would I be correct to assume that? Is that still, the culture, the conditions, and the capability of the industry? Is that still kind of a taxonomy that you work with?
So I'll let Rupert answer that. What I would say is that framing, for me as a CEO, has been incredibly helpful in looking at industry problems. And so a really good example of that is the Jewish Arab Muslim work that we did following the Hamas attacks of October 7th, in that the charity was able to step in and play an incredibly useful role of convening the industry, getting people to talk about what was happening with regards to Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and discrimination, because we were able to discuss it through the lens of poor mental health. Whereas other parts of the industry were not able to find a footing, I think, that they felt confident in to discuss what was happening in the industry. They had great difficulty navigating that. And so the charity was able to take a lead role in where other people actually feared to tread. So having that mental health lens has enabled us to go into areas which are sometimes deemed as being too controversial, because what we are doing is prioritizing the basic needs and concerns of the people working in the industry. So as that framing, time and time again, has proved so useful. We're able to go into issues with regards to financial precarity, which otherwise would be seen as part of industrial strategy,
right?
And therefore left up to just unions and employers to negotiate. And so it's recognizing, using that lens and the 3 Cs is an incredibly helpful way of being able to address certain things which constructively. Maybe add the fourth C of being able to do it constructively. But I'll let Rupert talk about the three Cs. Sorry.
Um, they remain an absolutely valid lens. And I think we're going to come on to the recent work we've been doing on loneliness, and they're pivotal in understanding the relationship between loneliness and poor mental health in some very interesting ways. But I think one of the things that's particularly striking across the series of Looking Glass surveys, and we've now done 4 of them, is the consistency, and that we're still seeing very much the same key drivers around culture, conditions, and capability across the sequence. So one of the things that strikes me particularly about the most recent report that we did, based on a survey conducted in the mid 2024, at the depths of a production downturn, was the consistency with the results from the previous one that we'd done in mid 2022, pretty much at the peak of a production boom. You might expect that the results would be wildly different. They were certainly worse in 24, but it was the consistency between them that I think is my key takeaway. And what it points to from my perspective is the structural and systemic nature of the drivers of poor mental health in the industry. And the best way to describe those, I think, remains culture, conditions, and capability.
I mean, you're stipulating to a really significant point here, is that, like, the consistency of findings, right? I mean, and I saw in earlier interviews, both of you, Marcus, you in particular, talking about that, if anything, what changed over the course of all these years of the charity collecting this data and developing these programs and toolkits and so on, is perhaps not so much that the numbers in the industry are changing all that much. I mean, there's clearly a systemic issue here. But if I understand, if I paraphrase or quote you correctly, that the level of engagement within the industry with this theme has changed. Could you speak a little bit about that, and how you see, perhaps hopefully so, I don't know, how that engagement might at some point translate into systemic change as well?
The level of engagement has undoubtedly changed. Whether you're talking about commissioning bodies, meaning like BBC, Amazon, Channel 4, so from the streamers to the PSBs, and also if you talk about the production companies, we've got massive engagement from the big three, which are All3Media, Fremantle, and Banijay, as well as small production companies as well. So the level of engagement has massively changed. I think the issue, which could be seen as quite depressing, is, as Rupert said, the numbers have stayed quite consistent despite that level of engagement in certain areas. And and with the production downturn and with the contraction, in many areas have got worse. And so that could be seen as depressing. However, as the point that I consistently say is that where there is focused effort rather than just goodwill, where there's focused effort, that seems to make a real difference. So we see it with regards to the recommendations for the most recent loneliness report, of trying to address some of those causes. We see that with regards to the whole picture toolkit of trying to address the problems of production. We see that even with the fact that the charity is now invited to give evidence at Parliament. So the level of engagement is massively high. What we need to do now is make sure that it is focused, because engagement and goodwill will not solve the problem. It really needs to be focused. And with that focus as well, I think what the charity recognized a year after 2019, but I think it became quickly apparent, is that one size does not fit all. And so that focus needs to actually, recognize the different needs and the different concerns of different communities. And so again, that's why for me, the Looking Glass survey and the other work that Rupert and his team does is so good. And it's critical that we get a large response rate so that we can slice and dice it and see that things are different in Scotland, and we need a different focused approach in Scotland than we do in Wales, or that we see that issues that are affecting Muslim women might be different from ones that are affecting disabled women who are not Muslim, or whatever. We need to it's recognizing that focus, but also recognizing that it's focused with different demographics.
I think I agree with all of that. I think I'd just add that my takeaway from the consistency is actually not a pessimistic one. It's that in an environment where you might expect the results to have deteriorated massively, they haven't. And there are pockets, for example, in relation to bullying, harassment, and discrimination, also in relation to the effects of our own toolkit, where there is cause for optimism. We can sort of see some levers of change actually happening. A lot of it is about the kind of concerted, focused, and partnership-based work that Marcus has alluded to. I guess what I'm thinking about is that initially we saw the results in terms of a moment of crisis, or something like a crisis, as a kind of response to a localized macro set of factors. And what's clear, or it's becoming clear to me as we're seeing a consistent picture across the time series, is that this is not the case. So, for example, the very serious challenges that are having really awful consequences for a lot of people, connected with the production downturn, challenges in finding work and so forth, are not showing through in quite the way we would expect if this was just a macro-driven situation. That I think that's my takeaway from it.
Yeah, and I guess that comes through in as you referenced before, the latest reports on loneliness as a key issue, sort of that ties a lot of the findings of the different Looking Glass reports together. And what struck me in that report too is, again, this reference to not so much people saying, oh, if only I would get paid more, then it would be fine. Or if I had a permanent job rather than a freelancer, it would be fine. But specifically pointing towards the industry culture, right? The fact that it's so transactional, there's incredible interdependence, the competitive nature, that you're working together as a kind of family, but you're also competing at the same time, which can be incredibly lonely, even if you're in a crowd, right? If you're on set and you're all making this beautiful thing, and it's that. I mean, it seems so paradoxical. So much of this work, right, which is so beautiful and so and then can make you feel so lonely at the same time. I mean, that's kind of what I took away from that. Maybe you want to talk a little bit more about that report, because it's so fresh and it's so powerful in how it ties so many things together.
Yeah, I don't want to take credit for other people's work, so I'll let Rupert answer that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, of course, I will make sure to reference properly our colleagues from Sheffield Markham University. Yeah.
Yeah. So the origins of the work on loneliness were in a piece of statistical analysis that we did in conjunction with a company called Select Statistics, based on the 2021 Looking Glass dataset. It was a factor analysis, and basically what it showed was that by a huge margin, the most powerful factor predicting poor mental health was loneliness. And important here to draw the distinction between loneliness and isolation. I think the point about being lonely in a crowd is absolutely right. This is an emotional state of not having the degree of social connection with other people that you want, as opposed to simply lacking contact with other people. So it's very much a workplace-based issue, and that's something that we've shown in the most recent research. What we didn't know originally was what the nature of the connection between abnormally high rates of loneliness and poor mental health amongst the film and television industry workforce was. We knew there was a significant relationship, but we didn't know whether it could have been coincidental. It might, on the other hand, have been directly causal, and the original piece of work didn't show that. So we worked with colleagues at the Centre for Loneliness Studies based at Sheffield Hallam University to do two things, really. One was to redo the statistical work to see whether we were able to understand the nature of that relationship better. The other was a qualitatively focused set of focus groups, interviews, and so forth, really to understand what the lived experience of people in the industry was, and get some insights into what we might do to mitigate that. And essentially what we showed was that the relationship between loneliness and poor mental health wasn't coincidental, but it's also not directly causal either. Essentially, what happens is that the three C's that you referred to earlier, the culture, conditions, and capability, have the effect of making people feel lonely, and that's what causes poor mental health. So loneliness or lack of social connection is the mediating factor or the driver of poor mental health. That's really what we discovered in this piece of work.
And would you argue that, I mean, the report makes a series of important recommendations, creating safe spaces and those kind of things, very important, very powerful. I could also see that a possible well, I wouldn't say remedy, but way of addressing this is to find ways to get people in the industry to collectively organize in more and different ways. I mean, I know that in the games industry, in the news industry around the world, that's kind of happening already. Like, and not necessarily through traditional unions, but through all kinds of more or less new or sometimes only virtual networked professional associations. Is that something you see happening as well, or that you would encourage, or how would that not matter? I don't
That's
know.
probably a policy question for Marcus.
Hmm.
From a research perspective, though, what I would say just up front is um, one of the things we've exposed in this work is that some groups are impacted more than others.
Right.
In terms of personal characteristics, also some professional ones. So, for example, people living with a disability or a long-term health condition, people who are neurodivergent, people from the Black and global majority, people with certain kinds of caring responsibilities, people who are LGBTQ plus. Also, for example, freelancers. Um, so one of the things we're particularly interested in is how peer-to-peer support from within those communities might play a role in mitigating some of the effects of loneliness. And that's so we have a kind of practical project, I suppose a piece of action research really, working with community groups, peer-led community groups, trying to build community amongst those constituencies that are particularly affected by experiences of loneliness. But at policy level, over to Marcus.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this is an opportunity to talk about how it's so important that the lived experience also informs some qualitative lived experience also informs our quantitative work as well. And so one of the first things that I did, even before the quantitative research, or way before the quantitative research on loneliness, the most recent report was published, was a week into taking the CEO position. A really important Black British figure, Horace Ove, who directed the first Black British feature film, died. And so we put on an event inviting other Black film and television creatives and people who knew Horace Ove, just to meet and just to share their experience of working in the industry, using in many ways the Horace Ove, it sounds a little callous, but using it as an excuse to meet. Because I recognized from my experience that one of the things that enabled me to have a long career in film and television, or just really television, was meeting my peers, meeting different groups that I felt that had a kinship with. And so constantly trying to find different ways to build, and I just sometimes call them friendships, because I feel that I'm trying to get away from calling it networking, because networking for me speaks as being too transactional. Of networking invariably has this person enabled me to get a different job? I'm meeting this person so that I can see whether I can get onto this production or what have you, or they'll be able to introduce me to somebody that will be able to get me funds to this. Whereas invariably what we're talking about is emotional support, and the way that we best understand that emotional support is through friendship. So finding different ways in which people can actually become friends is great, and we need to build that. So whether that's from the broadcast five-a-side football, whether the tournament that we do, whether that's through a Horace Ove memorial event. Right now, we've got an event downstairs as we're speaking about sickle cell. So it's predominantly affects Black people, is an illness that predominantly affects people with West African heritage, but I think it also affects Arabs as well from the Middle East. I think Ashkenazi Jews, also disproportionately affected by sickle cell. So you just find different ways in which people can come together, and you find different ways in which we can foster friendships. You're not going to foster it by saying, let's come together to address loneliness. That's a bit too straight on. But yeah, we're just trying to find different ways to do that, because I would not have been able to survive, and you talk to anybody else, without friendships. And I think the freelance nature of work, and what you identified before, Mark, with the competitiveness and of work as well, they erode opportunities for friendships. And it's those friendships which are so important to surviving in the industry. And I found them so important for me surviving in the industry.
And maybe, if you don't mind, I would like to tag on to that personal angle. I mean, not just because, of course, for pretty much everybody in these industries, the work is incredibly personal, right? They would describe it as a passion project and those kind of things. But something about something you've said in an earlier publication of the charity that really struck me, and I hope you don't mind me sort of mirroring your words back at you, but you were quoted in one of the reports a couple of years ago as saying, and please forgive me if I'm incorrect, but you said, you've been in the industry for quite a few decades. You at some point took up running. And at some point, you realized while you were running and doing this that you realized how much stress you'd been building up and that's, I guess, what your body was telling you, like, dude, this hasn't been very particularly healthy, and that was kind of an eye-opening experience to you. Now, I'm asking you to maybe reflect a little bit more on that statement, because in this series of interviews that I have the privilege of being able to do now, this is a story I'm consistently hearing from colleagues in the field who are, like you, active in raising awareness about health and well-being and creative careers. It's often a personal, very much embodied experience that sort of, I would almost say, woke them up to what the industry was doing to them. And does that make sense in any shape or form? Because I thought it was such a powerful story.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that I entered the industry straight from university. And I'd even done work experience whilst at university in film. And so part of the problem is that this is what I thought work was.
Right.
And so it immediately normalizes. I did not know different. It's the old analogy, which I'm going to get wrong now. It's about the fish don't recognize the water, or what's the phrase, Rupert? Or the one But basically, you don't. It's not normal. It's the stress that you're under is not healthy, nor is it normal. But if from 21 you're working in an industry where everyone tells you it is, you don't recognize it. So it does require either you to step out of the industry to see what's going on, or it requires sometimes to see other people where they've reached breaking point, and it requires a point of crisis to recognize what's going on, or more intellectual and academic analysis. So what is interesting is that the question we often get when we publish our reports is, what's it like in the rest of the workplace? Because people are really unsure as to whether thinking that only 12 thinking that the industry is a mentally healthy place to work, or knowing suicidal ideations are running at 30%, or knowing that I think it's 35%. Rupert, please jump in if I'm getting these wrong. 35% have self-reported serious or very serious mental health episodes or issues in the last 12 months. People don't know if it's normal, and so I think whether it's through an embodied experience such as running, which you're referring to, which happened to me, or whether it's through something else, it's what we need to do is knock people out of thinking that this is normal, because it's not normal. It just isn't. But people don't recognize that. I didn't recognize that. So it's yeah, I'm just repeating myself, but it's
You've got the stats right. You've got the stats right, Marcus. I mean, the last Looking Glass survey from 2024 showed 35% of respondents describing their mental health as poor or very poor. And when we compare that with stats for the wider workforce in the UK, it's that compares with 18%. So it's very nearly double the instance. If we're looking at loneliness as well, we find 30% of our respondents are often feeling lonely, and that compares to a national average of 8%. So the multiples are really, really striking. And I think another point to make is that the experience of loneliness and poor mental health is intractably linked to physical well-being, both because it has physical effects. It's often said, for example, the experience of intense loneliness is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. But also just because well-being generally, I think, needs to be conceptualized holistically. You need to recognize the specificity of each pillar of well-being, but understand that they are causally linked in all sorts of very complex ways. And that's really, I think, one of the directions in which the loneliness work that we're doing, or the work on loneliness and physical well-being and financial resilience and so forth is pointing towards a sort of more holistic conception of well-being.
One thing that I'm hearing, because arguably, I mean, we mentioned at the start of our conversation, right, that when the first Looking Glass survey was commissioned, there wasn't really much available in terms of data or research. I mean, like you said, there were one or two reports from Australia. I do remember the Actors' Wellbeing study there in 2014, and that was pretty much it. Now, especially in the UK, Australia, Canada, I mean, it's a kind of, it seems to be a bit of a Commonwealth kind of thing. It's a quite well-established field of work and research in different industries. Other countries are beginning to catch up. And my own country, the Netherlands, one of the things I'm often hearing from colleagues in journalism unions or in, other kind of professional associations, including film and television, our friends Anna and Rosanne at Cinemind, for example, I think you've been in touch with them as well, is that when they try to organize something for the industry to get together to maybe, have a workshop or something, they find that if they label it mental health or a related term, people express interest, but nobody shows up. But if they label it, for example, a colleague just the other day told me, I just named the session sleeping problems, and it was packed. That seems to be easier to get people in the door to talk about it than immediately going for the well-being or health discourse. I mean, how was that experience for you? I mean, is that a nice example of what changes over time, that talking about mental health becomes a bit more normal and a bit more accepted or destigmatized even?
You've got to meet people where they are,
Right.
you know? And so if we need to describe things as problems with sleeping, that's far more important than thinking that we need to. Similarly, there are gendered, we think there might be gendered aspects to language as
Mhm.
well.
Sure.
And so talking about um, coaching or talking about mental health um, within a framework of being able to achieve your best. So that's often how it's described in sports, that it's not mental health because there's something quote unquote wrong with you. It's mental health because it enables you to be a winner if you talk about mental health issues. And that
Mhm.
seems to be quite gendered. And so I think I'm not too worried about the language. We can worry about the language when we're talking academic to academic. We can worry about the language if we're maybe talking to um, regulators or like Ofcom or maybe talking to different government bodies. But the most important thing is that we we are putting on the broadcast fives, the football tournament. We don't say we're putting on anti-loneliness event to
Right.
address mental health. It's you have to meet people where they are. And
Right.
I don't think that there's any embarrassment, nor am I trying to one day get to a point where we'll call the broadcast fives the anti-loneliness sporting event. I don't want to get there. It's fine. So language for your audience. Pick the appropriate language for your audience is the lesson, I think. But Rupert, your view.
It's an interesting one, Mark, because one of the things I've been thinking about quite a bit is whether it it might be better from a branding perspective to focus on social connection as opposed to loneliness. I think it's interesting that some of the relevant government positions and select committees in the UK have rebadged themselves as social connection and loneliness, recognizing the specificity of the experience of loneliness, but also understanding that it's not necessarily the most palatable label to go out with. And I think it's defensible as well in terms, because what you do is you promote social connection in order to dissolve experiences of loneliness. So it's not just a semantic trick, but I think you're pointing towards an important hurdle. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and the significance of the loneliness or social connection framework just hits home to me once more. There's an organization here in my country, the Netherlands, called Morris, which is an organization that wants to position itself as a neutral agency for people across the different creative fields to contact if they experience, anything at their workplace that harms them,
Mm.
both mentally or physically or emotionally or whatever. And they were finding that nobody was contacting them. And it was like, well, there are issues. And they hired an advertising agency to help them rebrand themselves. And they just launched, actually, last week, a campaign. And the campaign is called I Hear You. And that's really about social connection. It's about, like, you're not alone, right? I mean, and simple. I mean, and that struck me about some of your reports as well, is the mitigating aspect of feeling seen, not just when you're shining and you're doing great work, but also when you're struggling and you can't talk to anybody about it, but to have either the research or an organization or a colleague or whatever actually see you and not stigmatize you for it. That can be that seems to me a very powerful effect here, that the loneliness issue is also addressing. Would that be fair, Rupert? As far as you can.
Completely fair. I mean, the persistent stigma around loneliness and mental health at work is one of the causes that we're trying to work out how to deal with. And I think probably validation um, and normalizing discussion is one of the first steps. It's not sufficient, but it's a necessary step in tackling that. But I mean, it's one of a handful of the key
Sure.
causes underpinning the syndrome. I think.
I mean, I
I,
realize. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Marcus, please.
I would be curious as to also whether there's something going on in film and television culture that makes it particularly hard to talk about and to acknowledge loneliness.
Mm,
You know, instinctively, I feel there is because it's very much a public-facing industry. It's very much about entertainment. It's um, quite gregarious. It's outgoing. So I feel as if there is something which makes it even harder. But I haven't seen academic work on that. So,
mm.
but just having worked in the industry for since 1992, it feels as if there should be, but I haven't read anything about that. But I don't know, Rupert, if you've read anything about that.
It's not something I'm directly familiar with, but it sounds plausible. I think there's also the premium on being a member of a team within um, film television production. I know that people's sense of identity is um, based on being part of a social unit in a way that makes it quite difficult to recognize the point when you feel disconnected from that
Mm.
unit, I think.
Yeah,
And
that
it's something that's come up in I'm aware of it coming up in qualitative work. I'm not aware of a kind of systematic analysis of it, it may exist and I'm unaware of it.
two anecdotes that come up for me in this context to what you're saying, Marcus, is um, recently the World Federation of Advertisers have been commissioning surveys to check in on how people are doing around the world. And these are surveys with 14,000 participants. And it turns out that the number one sort of issue that impacts the well-being of people in advertising, marketing, PR is what is described as a lack of company sense of belonging, which again to me sounds loneliness, right? That here you are in this super edgy, hip advertising agency where everybody looks great and is dressed smartly and is well educated, and you're just lonely. You don't feel you belong. Nobody really checks in on you or sees you. So that's something that to me speaks to a particularity of creative work, right? You're always working together with other people, and still you have that feeling that nobody sees you. But I'm also reminded, specifically with film and television, there's this really, Rupert, you might be familiar with that one as well. There's this really fabulous book from 1950 called In the Dream Factory. It's an anthropologist who spent a year in Hollywood and observing the American film industry. And she's oblivious to how the industry works. So it's truly like an anthropologist going native, right?
Hmm.
And she describes this stuff. I mean, you can copy paste it to today that like she just finds the way people interact bizarre. She calls it there's this weird kind of extroverted cordiality all the time. So people are super like, hey, how you doing? Everything is great all the time. And very extroverted, even though we even know statistically most people aren't. So you this constantly like pressure to be a sort of a version of yourself that you're not really authentically are. I mean, that in itself to me makes sounds incredibly lonely. So that might tie into your observation as well a little bit.
I
Yeah.
I think that's right. I mean, one of the things that's come out of the work is the effect of being immersed very quickly in a sort of synthetic proximity to other people, because that's kind of what a
Mm.
production climate is like, and then losing that very quickly. So there's something like grief reaction going on. Um, that I'd love it if there were still the resources to do that kind of ethnographic work. But I shall have to look that one up, Mark. But it sounds familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this might lead in nicely too, because I do appreciate that taking a lot
So
of your
Mark,
time. Oh,
just
yeah, please. Sorry, Marcus.
a real sorry, Mark, a real critical point that sometimes gets lost, which I think is really important with regards to diversity,
Mm.
is about critical mass. Because I think what often happens when we look at
Yeah.
the different demographics is that we can look at the statistics and say, oh, but Black people make up 20% of a production or 15% of a production, or sorry, Black and global majority people. Or we can say that a different demographic, disabled people make up X percentage. And worse yet, somehow the yardstick as to whether we are measuring success or not is invariably is that percentage the same as the general population?
Right.
Okay. The problem with that yardstick is that it can actually if you are meeting that percentage, but it means that you're the only disabled person on the production or the only black or brown person in that company or whatever. Yes, you're meeting that percentage, and that can, on paper, seem great for the HR department or whatever you're reporting to, but that does not help the loneliness that that person might feel if they are the only person who's having that experience. So I think what we need to do is that there is a piece of work or an acknowledgement that the way that we currently look at diversity figures, counting headcount diversity without acknowledging the importance of critical mass, is failing a lot of people.
Thanks for that, Marcus, and that kind of leads me in nicely to sort of a what's next kind of question, because, and I do appreciate I'm taking a lot of your time, so I do hope we can look forward to sort of what's next in all of this, and linking all of these debates to broader themes affecting the industry, like enduring diversity issues and lack of representation, in problems related to inclusion, but also the innovative capacity of an industry, right? When dealing with AI and everything, that in turn is predicated on people feeling safe to be who they are, to express themselves, to think outside of the box, and all those kind of things. So I wonder if you both could speak a little bit about how you see all of this moving forward, and one maybe addition to that question, because one thing that has struck me in doing the research on this in around the world is in recent years, especially post-pandemic, sort of the rapid growth of what I respectfully would call a kind of a cottage industry around well-being and health in media work. I mean, specifically in film, you've got all these companies now sort of claiming to provide healthy sets and right or mental health coordinators for film and television productions and those kind of things. I mean, it's all incredibly well intended and encouraging to some extent, but it also makes it more complicated, I guess, to provide a unified framework to all of this. How do you see that, and how do you take that from a charity perspective moving forward?
I don't know how to answer that.
Sorry.
How did maybe Rupert has a view, or could you possibly reframe? Or Rupert, do you have a view? Or possibly reframe.
I think I'm focused on, I suppose, concrete steps of where to take the work, which is in part thinking about how it relates to agendas around good work and fair work. It is also, as I mentioned, I think thinking holistically about well-being. I think there's some further work to do in terms of making sure that the various stakeholders on the public policy field are aware of this work and the connections between physical well-being and public health and loneliness and so forth. I'm also thinking that there probably needs to be some more work on the economic impacts. We've done some very, very provisional work trying to model what the cost to the film and television industry in the UK might be as a result, at least of poor mental health, knowing that loneliness probably accounts for a significant part of that. But I think that could do with being made more robust so that we're able to make, I think, the creative and ethical cases line up with the commercial ones. And I think there's also something really important about the way that film and television industries are a kind of canary in the mine for other sectors. I mean, it's often referred to as the original gig economy, and I think there is something really useful that we can do for the wider good, in terms of pointing out some of the pitfalls that may be coming to other sectors that are moving towards forms of casualization or more prevalence of freelance working. So those are really the kind of things I'm thinking about. Marcus, I don't know if that sparks anything.
Yeah, no, yeah. Sorry, Rupert, you answered that and you've focused me a lot better. I think one, it's a challenge within the charity, let alone of making sure that everything's joined up. It's very easy for us to have a program which looks at financial precarity with regards to grants. And then we do another program which looks at loneliness by having a community program, and then having another program which looks at, or another policy which looks at marital breakdown and offering a service for that. It's far more challenging for even within the team, even within a team of like just slightly under 40 people, to have a coherent strategy and agenda of everybody recognizing how all their work is joined up. So if it's challenging for within my team, you can imagine how challenging that is within the wider economy and the wider industry. For me, the not the canary in the coal mine, it's I'm trying to think what the right phrase is. What will be an indication as to whether things have really broken through for me is currently when Britain talks about the screen industry, and also other countries, they talk about two major things. They talk about the tax relief that productions have, and they talk about the UK's brilliant skill base as attracting direct foreign investment. Similarly, when you talk to other territories, they basically are competing using those two levers, saying, "Oh, let's improve the skill base so that we can attract more productions coming to whatever territory it is, and let's make sure that we have a tax system which attracts them as well, And we need a third. The third one has to be, are you attracted to the territory because it's actually a good working experience?
Right.
And anecdotally, and this was unfortunately, I can't name the streamer, but this for me was the breakthrough moment when we were speaking to a commissioner of a streamer who said that it's the working environment, as poor as the stats showed that it is, but it's the working environment in the UK that can attract people and does attract productions, for her particular streamer, and that's not acknowledged yet. And so the breakthrough for me of recognizing that mental health is not just a nice to have or a CSR moment is when people recognize that it is as important as the health of the screen industry, and we're not there yet. But that for me is the where we're trying to get to.
That's such a powerful notion. I mean, and I've heard this from interviews with colleagues in other industries as well, about making a healthy workplace or work environment a part of the key performance indicators of a company, for example, or what a company is known for. And that in itself will attract business and clients and funding, because, a healthy, happy workforce is probably a better predictor that things will be done on time and done well than, people struggling and suffering and falling by the wayside. So that's really that's a very powerful idea, Marcus. Look, I want to just thank you so much again for your time and for answering my overly complicated questions. And thank you also for the incredible work that you're doing, also in terms of like feeding into what we as in academics and educators are doing, and the stories we're able to tell to our students. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
And